I was sitting in Dee's beige sedan, parked across the street from the house I'd lived in for nearly 30 years. The green shutters Linda picked out were still there. So was the crack in the driveway I never got around to fixing, but the faded sold sign near the mailbox. That was new. A young couple was carrying a bookshelf through my front door. My front door. They looked happy. I watched them the way you watch strangers rearrange a room you built with your own hands. My son sold that house for $340,000 while I was lying in a hospital bed. He didn't ask me. He didn't tell me. He just did it. But I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here because my lawyer told me to take one last look before the paperwork does what paperwork does. I turned to Dee. We can go now. She pulled away without a word. Let me take you back to where this started. Welcome to Silent Father. If you've ever been taken for granted by the people you sacrifice the most for, settle in. This story was built for you. And I promise, every single word of it is going to land. My name is Gerald Briggs. I'm 67 years old. And for 29 years, I was a facilities maintenance worker at a regional medical center about 12 miles outside of town. I wasn't a doctor or a nurse. I was the man who showed up at 5 in the morning when the boiler quit in January. The man who replaced ceiling tiles nobody ever looked at. The man who kept the building running so everyone else could do their jobs. I didn't get plaques for it. I got a pension and a handshake when I retired, and I was grateful for both. I bought the house in 1994 for $87,000. 3 bedrooms, a sloped backyard, and a kitchen with cream-colored tile that Linda picked out on a Saturday afternoon at the hardware store. She held 2 samples up to the window light and said, "That one." I didn't argue. She was usually right about things like that. Linda passed away 8 years ago, and I haven't changed a single tile since. I don't intend to. The mortgage took 22 years to pay off. I made extra payments whenever I could. Double shifts, holiday weekends, a few Christmases where I worked while Kyle opened presents at home. In 2016, the final statement arrived in the mail, 0 balance. I stood at the kitchen counter and read that number 3 times. Then I folded the paper, placed it in the drawer next to Linda's recipe cards, and went outside to mow the lawn. That was how I celebrated. I paid $42,000 toward Kyle's college tuition over 7 years. I co-signed his first car loan when he was 23 and didn't have the credit history to do it alone. When he lost his job in 2018, I told him and his wife Megan to come stay at the house. They stayed 11 months. I never mentioned the money, never kept a running tab. I thought that was what fathers were supposed to do. I still do. Saturday mornings I still mow the back lawn even now. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe a habit. Maybe because the smell of cut grass and a little gasoline takes me straight back to Linda standing on the porch steps with 2 glasses of iced tea, squinting into the afternoon sun. Some things you keep doing not because they make sense, but because stopping would mean something you're not ready to say out loud. There's a manila folder that Dee has been keeping for me in her spare room. I'll tell you what's in it before this story is over. But not yet. Kyle and I used to be close, or at least I thought we were. When Kyle was young, maybe 9 or 10, he used to follow me into the garage on Saturday mornings. He'd hand me tools without being asked. Not because I told him to, but because he was watching and paying attention. That version of Kyle, the quiet boy who learned by watching, is the one I held on to for too long. After college, he called every Sunday. 20 minutes about nothing much. The weather, football, whatever he'd had for dinner. When he met Megan and settled down, the calls moved to every other week. Then once a month. Then only when he needed something. I noticed but told myself that's how it goes. Kids grow up, they get busy. I didn't want to be the kind of father who kept score. About 2 years ago, he called on a Tuesday, unusual. And somewhere in the conversation he asked, "Dad, have you ever thought about downsizing?" I said no. He said, "Just something to think about." Then moved on. At the time I didn't think much of it, then came the questions about the house's value. Casual, slipped into conversation. "Just wondering what places are going in your area, Dad?" I mentioned it to Dee one evening over coffee. She set her mug down and looked at me steadily. "Gerald," she said, "when your child starts asking what your house is worth, it's not because they're interested in real estate." I laughed it off. I told her Kyle was just making conversation. Dee didn't laugh back. 18 months ago, I had a cardiac scare. Nothing catastrophic, but enough for a few days in the hospital. Kyle visited. He was attentive. He suggested we put a power of attorney in place, just in case something happened and bills needed to be paid while I couldn't manage things. It seemed reasonable. It seemed like something a thoughtful son would do. So I signed it. A few weeks later, Kyle stopped by unannounced. I found him in the kitchen with his phone out, photographing the cabinets, a small notepad in his hand. He was measuring the back hallway. I stood in the doorway and watched him before he noticed me. "Just helping you think through options," he said, "in case you ever decide to sell." Something cold moved through me. But I said nothing. That was the moment I should have paid closer attention. The second cardiac event hit on a Wednesday morning. I was reaching for my coffee when something shifted in my chest. Not pain, more like a door closing. I sat down on the kitchen floor and called Dee. She had the paramedics there in 4 minutes. I was in the hospital for 9 days, conscious the whole time, which was a mercy. Lying still with nothing but your own thoughts has a weight to it. I focused on breathing right, eating what they brought me, sleeping when the nurses said so. I wasn't afraid. I was mostly thinking about the garden. Kyle came on day 2. He stayed about 40 minutes, brought a magazine I'd never read, and told me not to worry about anything. He looked healthy, relaxed even. I told him I was fine and he didn't need to make the drive again. He said he wanted to. On day 6, he came back. He sat in the vinyl chair beside the bed, patted my hand and said, "Just rest, Dad. Don't worry about the house or any of that. I'll handle things." I thanked him. I meant it. On day 8, my phone rang. Dee. Her voice had a careful quality, the kind of carefulness that means someone is choosing every word before they say it. "Gerald, I drove past your house this afternoon." A pause. "There's a lockbox on your front door, and a car in the driveway I've never seen before." I asked her to describe exactly what she saw. She did. I listened without saying a word. When she finished, I was quiet for a long while. "Thank you, Dee," I said. "I'll call you in the morning." I didn't call Kyle. I didn't call anyone. I lay in that hospital bed and stared at the water stain on the ceiling tile, the kind of thing I'd have fixed in 20 minutes at work, and I let the full weight of it settle into me slowly. He had used that power of attorney, the one I signed in good faith, to list my house, close a sale for $340,000, and deposit the money into an account I had no access to. While I was in this bed, while I was thanking him for handling things, he didn't sell a building. He sold 30 years of my life and thought I wouldn't notice. The next morning I called Dee and asked her to bring the manila folder from her spare room. She arrived within the hour, set it on my tray table, and didn't ask a single question. That's Dee. Kyle came one final time before my discharge. Same chair, same easy manner. He mentioned the house needed some work and that he was looking at a nice apartment for me. Easier to maintain, he said. He never once mentioned the sale. Not one word, I nodded. I told him that was thoughtful. When he left, I opened the folder. The same evening, Dee called me about the lockbox. After I'd hung up and the room went quiet, I asked a nurse if I could use the ward phone. She brought me a handset without asking why. I called a legal aid referral line. The number was printed on a laminated card pinned to a community board I'd walked past 100 times in that hospital corridor. I'd never had a reason to look at it closely before. That night I did. They connected me with an attorney named Patricia Voss. She specialized in real estate disputes and cases involving the financial exploitation of older adults. She asked me 3 questions. Did I sign the power of attorney? Yes. Did I authorize the sale of my property? No. Could I produce proof that the original deed was in my name? Yes, that last answer mattered because of a habit I'd carried for 29 years in facilities work. You always make a copy before you hand anything over. Always. When Kyle brought me the POA to sign, I photocopied it first and tucked the copy into a plain manila folder. I never imagined I'd need it. I just couldn't stop myself. That was the folder Dee carried to my hospital room. Inside the copied POA document, the original deed, printed text messages from Kyle, the ones where he'd asked what the house was worth, the ones I hadn't deleted because something in me wasn't quite ready to. A handwritten note from Dee describing exactly what she'd seen in my driveway, and a letter from Patricia outlining what she planned to do. She revoked the power of attorney. She ran a title search. She filed paperwork challenging the sale and prepared a notice that clouded the title, alerting any parties that the transfer was disputed. She told me plainly, say nothing. If Kyle found out too soon, he could move the money. So I said nothing. While Patricia worked, Kyle was texting me apartment listings and mentioning he'd found a nice place near a pharmacy. Silence was never a weakness. It has always been preparation. My cousin Ruth Ann hosts a barbecue every summer in her backyard. Same folding tables, same plastic chairs, same potato salad she's been making since 1987. 3 weeks after I was discharged, she called and said she'd love to see me. Dee drove. I moved slowly, getting out of the car, still carrying the stiffness that comes after your body has reminded you it isn't invincible. I settled into a lawn chair near the fence and let the afternoon come to me. About 20 people were there, kids chasing each other around the yard, my brother-in-law Ray flipping burgers at the grill, neighbors I'd known for decades. It was ordinary and warm, and I was glad to be outside. Kyle arrived with Megan about 40 minutes after we did. He looked relaxed. He moved through the yard the way confident people do, touching shoulders, laughing easily, refilling his drink without being asked. I watched him from my chair. Dee sat beside me, quiet as a fence post. At some point, Kyle was standing with a small group, Ray, 2 of my cousins, and a neighbor named Carol. I couldn't hear every word from where I sat, but I could hear enough. He was explaining how he'd been helping me transition out of the old house, looking at some nice places for me. His voice carried the particular ease of a man who believes he has already won something. Carol looked across the yard at me and called out pleasantly, "Gerald, are you excited about the move?" The yard went still. I looked at Kyle. He looked at me, and for a moment everything got very quiet. "Kyle," I said without raising my voice, "I didn't ask you to sell my house." The sentence sat there in the open air. Kyle laughed, a short, uncomfortable sound. "Dad, come on. We talked about this. You agreed it was the best move." He said it smoothly, like a man who has rehearsed a line and trusts it will hold. "No," I said, "we didn't." Then I told them, not dramatically, not with any anger I let show. I simply told the table what had happened, that while I was in a hospital bed for 9 days, my son used a power of attorney I had signed in good faith to sell my home for $340,000, that the money went into an account I have no access to, that I was not consulted, not informed, and that Kyle had looked me in the eye during that hospital visit and never mentioned it, that my attorney had already filed a legal challenge and the power of attorney had been revoked. Kyle's face went through several changes in a short space of time. First denial, "That's not what happened." Then something softer, "I was trying to help you, Dad, you weren't well." Then, when neither of those landed, anger. His voice rose. "You went behind my back?" Nobody laughed, but I think several people in that yard wanted to. Megan touched his arm. He didn't move. Ray set down his spatula and walked across the yard to stand beside my chair. He didn't say a word. He just stood there. One of my cousins, a woman who had always gotten along well with Kyle, set her plate down on the table and looked away toward the garden fence. Carol shook her head slowly. Nobody spoke in Kyle's defense. The silence around him was not hostile. It was simply honest. Kyle left shortly after. Megan followed without looking back. When the gate closed behind them, Dee put her hand briefly on my shoulder. I covered it with mine. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. But I also felt, for the first time since I'd watched strangers carry a bookshelf through my front door, like the ground beneath my feet was solid again. That evening, my phone rang 6 times. Kyle's name lit up the screen each time. I watched it and did not answer. Later, a text message came through. It was long, the kind a person spends 20 minutes writing and still manages to go in 3 different directions at once. There was apology in it. There was explanation. And there was accusation. The part I remember most clearly said I was making him look like a criminal. I read it once, set the phone face down on Dee's kitchen table, and slid it across to her without a word. She read it carefully, set it back down, and went to put the kettle on. That was exactly the right response. Within a few days' time, Kyle's approach shifted. He contacted Patricia Voss directly, wanting the case dropped. Patricia responded with a formal letter that calmly restated every relevant fact. Kyle hired his own attorney shortly after. That was his right. The process moved forward regardless. Megan called once. I answered because I've always believed in giving people the chance to say what they mean. She didn't apologize. She asked me to consider what all of this was doing to the family. I told her, as evenly as I could manage, that I had been thinking about this family for 30 years. She didn't have much to say after that. The legal process took months. I won't walk you through every step, because that isn't the point of this story, and I'm not the right person to explain what applies in any other situation. What I can tell you is that Patricia was thorough and patient, and the challenge moved forward. The young couple who had purchased my house were notified through proper legal channels that the title was disputed. They had their own attorney. The situation was not their fault, and I held nothing against them, but the sale could not stand cleanly as it was. In time, there was a financial resolution. The proceeds were fully accounted for. Kyle was required to answer for every dollar. Patricia mentioned at one point that what Kyle had done could carry criminal consequences in our state. I chose not to pursue that path, not because what he did wasn't serious, but because the civil process had already done what needed doing, and I was genuinely exhausted. Kyle and Megan stopped coming to family gatherings. Ray told me one afternoon that Kyle had asked another relative for a loan and been turned down flat. I didn't feel particular satisfaction hearing that. I just nodded. Kyle wasn't destroyed. He was simply no longer protected by the silence that had always kept him comfortable. I stayed at Dee's spare room while everything sorted itself out. I planted a small vegetable garden along her back fence, tomatoes, a few rows of green beans, some herbs I didn't strictly need but liked having around. I fixed a leaking faucet in her kitchen that had been dripping since March. In the evenings we watched the news, Dee in her armchair and me on the sofa with a cup of coffee going slowly cold. Life was small, life was quiet, life was mine. Months later, Kyle sent 2 words. "I'm sorry, Dad," I read them, set the phone down on the counter, and walked back out to the garden. I didn't close the door. I just stopped holding it open. I've thought a lot about what I'd say if someone asked me what I learned from all of this. Not about the law, not about power of attorney documents or title searches. About people. A house is not just a structure. Every room in that place was built on years of early mornings and overtime shifts and small choices I made to give more than I kept for myself. When someone takes that from you, the injury isn't financial. It goes deeper than that. It says your labor didn't matter. It says you were a resource, not a person. If you are watching this and you recognize something in this story, if you have spent years giving and quietly wondering why it never seemed to be enough, I want you to hear this clearly. Your silence was never weakness, and you are allowed to protect yourself, even from your own blood. Setting a boundary is not cruelty. I want to be careful about that, because I know how it feels to be told you're being difficult when you're simply asking to be treated with basic decency. Being someone's father doesn't mean you have to be their floor. And about Dee, the neighbor who noticed a lockbox I couldn't see, who drove me to an attorney when I could barely walk steadily, who made tea when my own son was sending messages full of accusations. Loyalty doesn't always come from the people carrying your last name. Sometimes it lives next door, in a beige sedan, in a kitchen that smells like chamomile and common sense. Have you ever had someone sell something that wasn't theirs to sell? Your time, your trust, your home? Tell me about it in the comments. I'll be reading. This channel was built for voices like yours. If this story felt like it's written for you, please subscribe to Silent Father. We'll be here next time. I'm Gerald. I'm 67. I lost a house and found out exactly who my family was, and I'm still standing.